so the rights and obligations that landlords and tenants have that are structured in our statute are not allowed to take effect, essentially, because of this atmosphere of fear. People are afraid to make complaints. They're afraid to assert their rights. They're worried that displacement could come at any time, and they are right to worry because displacement through eviction or extreme rent spikes is a cause of homelessness in our state and nationally. So for those reasons, we are prioritizing this bill because we think that it would allow reasonable and responsible landlords to continue doing business, and it would put a stop to the bias and unfairness that our system exacerbates and facilitates. So I'll go to a summary of the bill. There is my summary on OLIS that goes section by section in great detail. I'm going to summarize, and then I'll briefly speak to a couple of common questions and take any questions. So there are two sections of the bill. One addresses just cause and evictions. The other section addresses other sections, address rent increases. I'll speak first about the just cause section. It applies only after the first year of occupancy. And so a tenant who has been in the home more than a year is protected under 608 with a just cause standard. That means that that tenant who has become a longer term tenant, has been in the home without trouble for a year, is protected and cannot be evicted except if the tenant has violated the lease or committed a cause. There are several ways in our current statutes that allow landlords to evict tenants who have violated their leases, and those are for-cause termination notices. All of those remain untouched by Senate Bill 608, and a landlord retains the ability to use any one of those after passage of the bill. The bill also creates 4 new landlord-based causes that would allow a landlord to terminate a tenancy for business or personal reasons that are codified in the statute that allow the landlord to make decisions about how to use the property. And those 4 reasons, very briefly, are if the landlord wants to move into the property to live there, or his or her immediate family wants to move in, or if the landlord wants to renovate or needs to renovate or repair the unit, and the unit would be unfit for occupancy during those repairs, or if the landlord wants to change the use of the property, to convert it or demolish it, change it to something other than a residential use, or if the landlord has accepted an offer to purchase the property to someone who is going to move in to the property and live there. Those notices under 608 would, even though the tenant has not violated the lease, allow the tenant to be terminated or evicted from the property with 90 days notice and 1 month's rent worth of relocation assistance, unless it was a landlord who had 4 or fewer units, and that landlord would be exempt from the relocation assistance portion of the bill. Those are the landlord-based causes that would apply to terminations of month-to-month tenancies after application of the standard. I'll talk briefly now about fixed-term tenancies. The bill would allow, for the first year of occupancy, fixed-term tenancies to terminate at the end without cause, and the landlord could decide not to renew or let those tenancies terminate without cause during that first year of occupancy. After the standard of the bill applies, after the first year of occupancy, any fixed-term tenancy, unless the parties agreed to renew, would be rolled over into a month-to-month tenancy unless the landlord had one of the 4 landlord-based causes that we just spoke about, or if the landlord had an additional cause, which is codified in the statute to mean that a tenant within the last 12 months has committed 3 or more violations of the lease, and the landlord has given a written warning for each of those violations. And in that situation, the landlord would be allowed to choose not to renew the lease, not to have it roll over to a month-to-month, give a 90-day notice of termination, and would be exempt from providing any kind of relocation assistance in that circumstance. So that's essentially the way the just cause standard applies. There are damages provided for a violation, and there is one big exception from the entire coverage of the just cause standard, and that would be for landlords who have 2 or fewer units on a property and landlords who are living on that property. And those landlords would be exempt, and they would continue to be covered by current law with no change. I'll move quickly to the summary of sections 2 and 3 of the bill, which are the provisions that address rent gouging and rent spikes. And those sections apply to regular, I'll call them, landlord-tenant situations, as well as manufactured home park rental situations. And in those circumstances, Section 2 is the regular tenancies, and Section 3 is the manufactured home park tenancies. And in those situations, what the bill provides is protection against rent gouging and rent spiking without notice. So landlords under the bill would be able to set rents however they liked at the beginning of a tenancy. Tenant agrees to the rent, moves in, and at that point, the provisions of the bill would kick in and rent increases would be allowed, as the landlord chooses, up to a cap of 7% plus the consumer price index as it pertains to the western region of the United States. And the bill provides that the consumer price index that would apply here would be that which is set by the Bureau of Labor and the Bureau of Labor Standards, which is a federal bureau that publishes the CPI every month as reflecting the year-over-year change in the consumer price index for that month. And that would be the CPI that would apply on top of the 7% standard that is set in the bill, and that would be the parameter within which rent increases could happen on a yearly basis. Now, that does not prevent rent increases altogether. It prevents extreme spikes. And what our clients have come to us and told us about is spikes of 20%, 30%. You'll hear stories about 100% rent increases. And those are the functional equivalent of an immediate eviction for our clients who are unable to have their cost of living double within such a short time frame. So this bill will help protect against displacement as a result of that. There are three important exceptions. The bill does not apply to new construction for a period of 15 years after the certificate, of occupancy, and that is designed to make sure that the bill has no impact on new construction, and so that's one exception. Another exception is to make sure that regulated housing that is provided as subsidized according to a state, local, or federal program already has its own parameters, and so the state would not apply to those providers. And then the only other exception would be that and so the rule is that after a tenancy is over, landlords may reset their rent to market in between tenancies for the new tenant. The only exception to that piece is if the prior tenant was terminated according to a no-cause notice that was issued in the first year of occupancy. And in that situation, the landlord would need to reset the rent only within that 7% plus the CPI capacity. The bill also goes on to provide that the Department of Administrative Services will post the applicable CPI and rent provision and will provide a press release and education and information on its website about the applicable statutes. The CPI was set, importantly, to be tracked at the September CPI that's published by the Federal Bureau, and it would apply starting the next January. And just briefly, the reason for that is that landlords are required under the current law to provide 90 days notice of a rent increase, and that difference in dates gives landlords plenty of time to issue notices that could take effect in the year afterwards. I'll wrap up my comments simply by saying that this is a bill that will help remove inequities in our current system that are currently having devastating impacts on our clients across the state. Our feeling is that this is an emergency. We have people losing their homes on a daily basis, and we are unable to stop that. This bill will help provide stability. For that reason, we would oppose any amendment to remove an emergency clause that is an important part of the bill in our view. We also, I echo Senator Burdick's comments about the importance of local jurisdictions' ability to take their own steps on other measures. This bill has no preemption in it, nor should it, and we would oppose any effort to insert a preemption provision in the bill. And one other common question that has come up is whether there should be an amendment to the provisions that allow a landlord to terminate a tenancy even after the just cause standard applies if they have sold it to someone who wants to move in. And my response to that is that this bill is modeled after jurisdictions that have similar provisions. Our standard is actually more generous generous than many other jurisdictions that have similar provisions, and you will hear testimony from many from other realtors who will attest to the fact that that still works for them in terms of their practice with sales to people who would like to move in. I'll just wrap up by saying that in our view, our clients are families and low-income Oregonians who rent their homes, and all of them, whether white, brown, black, elderly, young, should not have to live with a constant threat of displacement due to no fault of their own. Oregonians deserve better. We really appreciate your attention to this, and we really hope for a moving forward of this bill. Thank you very much.